After Binta's parents died years ago in a ghastly accident, Binta was all alone, broken and scared. She inherited a multi-billion asset from her parents. At 25, she was already a billionaire thanks to her parents' will. Binta knew that her greatest downfall would come from choosing the wrong life partner. From the way suitors flocked around her, she knew something wasn't right, and she was very sure it was for her money and not to love. If she made a mistake, she would lose everything. After much thought, she decided to escape the world she knew. She moved to a new city where no one recognized her, dressed like an ordinary girl, and lived a humble life. She entrusted her businesses to capable hands and disappeared into anonymity. A week after settling in her new city, Binta began her search for work. However, finding a job without a certificate proved difficult. Determined to keep herself occupied, she accepted any work available, knowing exactly what she was looking for. One day, she entered a bustling market, dressed like someone struggling to make ends meet. Hours passed before she finally secured a job in a wine shop owned by a young, ambitious man named Deo. Deo, a 28-year-old businessman, was born into wealth, his family deeply rooted in the wine industry. After completing university, he took over the family business, expanding its reach. Impressed by Binta's enthusiasm, he hired her immediately. Binta was not just beautiful, she was hardworking and intelligent. Deo soon noticed how effortlessly she charmed customers, building an unmatched reputation for the shop. Patrons openly praised her for her excellent service, some even claiming they had never met someone with such a natural gift for communication. Deo was captivated. He began involving Binta in business discussions, valuing her insights and considering her opinions before making decisions. Binta became the heart of his business. One evening, Deo confided in his parents about Binta. He spoke of her excellence, her dedication, and her keen business acumen. However, his mother noticed something unusual: the way he beamed whenever he mentioned her name. With a stern expression, she warned him, "I don't like the way you're smiling. You cannot marry just anyone. Remember where you come from." Deo nodded but remained silent. His father, Mr. Anthony, also agreed. "Your mother is right," he said. But their words came too late. Deo had already fallen deeply for Binta. Every conversation with her felt like a spark igniting within him. He couldn't pinpoint when it happened, but he craved her presence like a child craves sweets. One fateful afternoon, Deo was in his office, engrossed in work on his laptop, when a knock came at the door. "Who is it?" he asked, eyes still fixed on his screen. "It's Binta," she replied. The moment he heard her voice, he instinctively straightened his posture, adjusted his clothes, and placed his palms firmly on the table. "Come in," he said, grinning. Binta entered and stood before him, explaining an issue with a customer who had returned a supposedly high-quality wine, claiming it was fake. As she spoke, Deo's mind wandered. His eyes traced her from head to toe, her smooth skin, her delicate frame, her lips, which seemed unusually inviting that day. Without thinking, he stood up. He moved closer, and before Binta could react, he pressed his lips against hers. Shock paralyzed her. She struggled to break free, but Deo held her tightly, his breath warm against her skin. When he finally released her, she staggered back, staring at him in disbelief. "I'm so sorry," he stammered. I didn't mean to, Binta. I love you. I have fallen for you." She studied him for a long moment before her voice cut through the air like a sharp blade. "You shouldn't have done this." And with that, she turned and slammed the door behind her. Deo collapsed onto his couch, running a hand through his hair. He had ruined everything. How could he have allowed his emotions to cloud his judgment? What if she already had a boyfriend? What if she despised him? Though many women in the market desired him, Binta was different. That was what made his heart ache the most. For a whole week, Binta stayed away from work, ignoring his calls. Desperate, Deo sent friends to plead on his behalf, wealthy, influential men who made the people in Binta's compound question her actions. "Who does she think she is?" they whispered. "A girl like her will never find a man like Deo again." They had no idea who she truly was. Even her roommate advised her to accept him, arguing that he could lift her out of poverty. One evening, Deo arrived at her home with two friends. After much pleading, Binta finally agreed to speak to him. But before accepting his apology, she made one thing clear. What you did was wrong. You took me for granted. Next time, always ask before doing something like that. Days turned to weeks and weeks into months. People in the shop noticed a shift in their relationship. It was no longer just between an employer and his worker. Jealousy festered. Other salesgirls whispered among themselves. Girls from wealthy backgrounds who had once set their sights on Deo fumed. How could he choose a commoner over them? Rumors spread like wildfire. Determined to face whatever storm awaited, Deo decided it was time to confront his parents. One evening, after dinner, he sat with his 3 sisters and parents in the family's lavish sitting room. "There's something I need to discuss," he announced. His mother leaned forward. "Is everything okay with the business?" Deo nodded. He took a deep breath. "Mom, Dad, I've found the woman I want to marry." Excitement filled the room. His mother beamed. "This is the best news. Who is she? Do we know her?" "Yes, Mom. You know her," he said. "Who is her father?" she asked eagerly. Deo hesitated before saying, "Her name is Binta, my salesgirl." A cold silence fell. Then, his mother shot up from her seat, her face contorted with rage. "What?" she screamed. "Did I not warn you against that poor girl? I told you these girls only want rich men." She pointed a trembling finger at him. "You will not bring that rat into this family." In a world where wealth and class dictated relationships, Binta found herself trapped between love and family expectations. She was deeply in love with Deo, but his mother, Mrs. Anthony, was determined to keep them apart. "But I love her, Mom. I love Binta," Deo muttered desperately. "Let that love catch fire," his mother snapped, waving her fingers around her head. "You will not marry a nobody over my dead body." She turned sharply to her husband. "Talk to your son. He won't marry that nobody." "What will happen to Lucy?" "I have already promised my friend that Deo will marry her daughter, and that is final. I have invested so much in that girl because I want her as my daughter-in-law." Deo clenched his fists. "Dad, I don't love Lucy. How many times do you want me to say this?" "You will love her when you marry her," Mr. Anthony said firmly. That night, Deo lay on his bed, wide awake. Sleep was far from him. His sisters had promised to speak to their parents, but he knew their mother always had the final say. He could not imagine himself married to Lucy. He didn't even want to think about it. It would be tough. But he was determined to show his parents that Binta was the right woman. She was the kind of woman any parents would be proud of. The next morning, Deo left the house without eating breakfast, a silent protest against his parents' decision. He became withdrawn, avoiding family discussions, isolating himself in his room whenever he returned from work. He was no longer the cheerful son they knew. One day, Mrs. Anthony threatened him. "If you don't come out of that room, I will go to your shop and disgrace that girl." Her words hit Deo like thunder. He didn't want Binta to know about his family's rejection. He had lied to her, telling her that his family loved her. He still remembered the joy on Binta's face when he told her that. He couldn't bear to ruin that happiness. He decided to fight for their love without dragging her into the conflict. Still, he knew one thing: if he showed any weakness before his mother, he would lose Binta forever. "Mom, the day I see you in my office, I will leave it for you," Deo declared, his voice cold and firm. Mrs. Anthony stared at him, stunned. None of her children had ever spoken to her like that. "Am I the one you are talking to in that manner?" she asked, raising her hand to slap him. But before her palm could land, Deo caught her wrist mid-air. "Mom, I am no longer a child. I am a man now, and you must accept it. Let me make my own choices for once. I don't want Lucy," he said and stormed out. Mrs. Anthony stood frozen in shock. She wiped her face with her palms as hot tears streamed down. Everything seemed like a bad dream. Was this really her son? The same Deo who had always obeyed her without question. And all this, because of a nobody? An ordinary salesgirl. A girl who was not even on the same level as her housemates. Perhaps that girl had bewitched him. She sank into the couch, struggling to process everything. She had raised her children with careful discipline, ensuring they followed the family's high-class values. What had gone wrong with Deo? Later that night, she told her husband everything. Mr. Anthony was equally displeased. But after much thought, he considered that maybe Binta was truly a good girl, as Deo had said. After a long discussion, They decided to call Deo for a talk. Deo, in his room, felt guilty for how he had reacted. He never meant to hurt his mother. He only wanted to stop her from interfering with his relationship. He was about to take a bath when a knock came at his door. "Who is that?" he asked. "It's me, Cynthia. Mom is calling you," his sister said. Deo's heart skipped. He knew this moment would come. He took a deep breath, trying to calm his nerves. He had no intention of apologizing, but he also wasn't ready for another fight. "Tell Mom I'll be there shortly," he said. He abandoned his bath, quickly dressed, and stepped into the living room. His parents sat waiting, but instead of anger, his mother surprised him with a warm smile. Deo hesitated, confused. "Deo, my son," Mrs. Anthony began with an unusual softness in her voice. "I know you think I'm angry, but I'm not. You showed me that you are a real man, someone who knows what he wants." Deo blinked in shock. "What? You heard me," she said. "I won't waste words. I have agreed you can marry Binta." Deo's heart leaped with joy. "Are you sure, Mom?" Mrs. Anthony exchanged glances with her husband before nodding. "Yes, but on one condition. Tell me. Whatever it is, I'll do it," Deo said eagerly. "I want Binta to come and stay with us for 6 months," she said. "I want to train her, to mold her into someone fit for our family. I will make her a proper daughter-in-law." Deo hesitated. He knew this would not be easy for Binta. Convincing her would be difficult. Mr. Anthony nodded in agreement. "Your mother only wants the best for you. You are a lion, and you deserve a lioness as a wife," he said, shaking Deo's hand. That night, Deo struggled with how to present the idea to Binta. He rehearsed different approaches. "Binta, my mom wants you to come live with us for 6 months. No, that sounded wrong. "Binta, my mom wants to train you so you can fit into our class." Definitely bad. "Binta, my mom wants you to spend time with us, so you can be familiar with the family." Yes, that was perfect. But when he finally told Binta, she was not happy. In fact, she was heartbroken. Deo explained that this was the only way they could be together. He loved her deeply and was willing to fight for their love, regardless of her background. He assured her that after their wedding, they would move out of his parents' house and live independently. After much thought, Binta made a painful decision. She agreed to move in with Deo's family. When she arrived at their mansion, Mrs. Anthony took a long look at her and asked coldly, "So, you are Binta, the girl Deo has been talking about?" The moment Binta entered the sitting room, she was unaware of her facial expressions, but she smiled and nodded. "I wonder what he saw in you that is making him crazy," Mrs. Anthony murmured. Binta noticed the movement of her mouth and the expression on her face. It was clear that whatever she had said wasn't pleasant. However, it was too early to complain. Deo entered the sitting room with Binta's box and led her to his room. Binta wanted to ask if he was sure that his family truly loved her. She had many questions, but Deo didn't give her the chance to ask. Binta had barely settled in when they heard a knock on the door. It was Deo's younger sister, Mary. "What is it?" Deo asked. "Mom said I should call Binta. Tell Mom that she is coming right away," Deo responded. He was so happy that he pinched Binta's waist and said, "Didn't I tell you that you would enjoy your stay here? I don't think there will be anything hard to do because we have 2 house helps." Binta nodded, but she was surprised when Deo's mother asked her to make a gyuzi soup and pounded yam on her first day in the house. She spent hours alone in the kitchen preparing the food. Was this part of their welcome? She wondered. Deo, visibly annoyed, approached his mother. "Why is Binta cooking instead of the maids?" he asked. Mrs. Anthony smiled. "I want to train her into a full woman. I am not punishing her." "Or are you trying to say your wife-to-be doesn't know how to cook?" "No, Mom, but..." "There's no but. Deo, soon, you will thank me for training her," Mrs. Anthony said, patting his shoulder. Without arguing further, Deo went inside and relaxed. Binta was exhausted when she finished cooking. She had never pounded yam before. She tried to express her displeasure to Deo, but he assured her that everything would soon be fine. However, that was only the beginning. From that day, Binta was treated like a maid. Whenever she complained about the way his family treated her, Deo would always tell her to endure it for the sake of their love. She woke up before dawn every day to cook various meals, clean the house, and do other chores. One day, Deo finally got fed up and confronted his mother. "Why is Binta the one doing all these things instead of the maids?" he asked angrily. Mrs. Anthony, as usual, had a response ready. "The only reason she is allowed to cook is that she cooks better than the maids. If she wasn't a good cook, she wouldn't be in the kitchen," she said. Deo smiled, pleased to hear his mother praise Binta. He loved that his family enjoyed her cooking. After all, wasn't good food the way to a man's heart? To him, this only proved that Binta wasn't just beautiful but also domestic. Excited, he went to share the news with Binta. Binta, however, just stared at him. How blind could he be? She thought. She was beginning to see him differently. He was not the man she wanted. Everything about him screamed mommy's boy. She had realized that his mother had total control over him. No matter how angry he was, she knew how to manipulate him. Binta knew the family was trying to frustrate her, but she was determined to show them how resilient she was. There was no other word for what they were doing, it was pure frustration. She cooked all the meals, cleaned the house, scrubbed the kitchen, and even joined them in their illegal business. That was when she discovered a dark secret. The family's wealth came from selling fake and stolen wines. Mr. Anthony had a small factory in the house where he produced assorted wines, which were later packaged and sold as original. People brought used wine cartons and bottles to them, which they repurposed for their fake products. Binta was horrified. When Mrs. Anthony noticed her reaction, she approached her and said coldly, "Whatever you see here stays with you till death. If I hear a word outside, I will make life miserable for you and your family." Binta nodded silently. She later tried to talk to Deo about it, hoping he would see reason, but he dismissed her concerns. "Many people in the market do the same thing. It's just another way to make money," he said. Binta had no choice but to participate in their illegal activities. As if dealing with Mrs. Anthony wasn't enough, she also had to endure Deo's sisters. One day, while Binta was in the room with Deo, Cynthia walked in with a pile of clothes. "Binta, wash these clothes and iron them for me when they dry. I need them for an outing tomorrow," Cynthia said, handing over the clothes. Binta stared at her in shock, then turned to Deo, expecting him to intervene. Instead, all he said was, "Cynthia, you can go now. She will wash them later." Binta's eyes burned with fury. "What did you just say?" she asked after Cynthia left. "What do you mean?" Deo said. "I just told her to go and that you will do the washing later. Is there anything wrong with that?" Binta could barely contain her anger. "Do you even hear yourself, Deo? Am I a maid in this house? I washed your parents' clothes the other day. Then Mary asked me to iron hers. And now Cynthia wants me to wash hers too? I think this is the height of it all. Yet you see nothing wrong." "Binta, I don't like how you complain all the time. I hate women who nag too much," Deo retorted. "Nag? Can't you see that your family doesn't want me? That they are frustrating me? You are the one frustrating yourself with your bad attitude. I am beginning to see things from my mother's perspective. Why do you always complain about little things? Can't you just endure all this for now? This is the 4th month, just 2 more months, and we will leave this house," Deo said, his voice harsh. "Is that why your family turned me into a maid? I do everything for you, your father, your mother, and your siblings. The only person who treats me like a human in this house is the gate man." Binta snapped. Deo chuckled. "Why wouldn't the gate man treat you like a human? What does he have to offer you? Listen, Binta, I am trying my best to take you out of poverty. You should be grateful. There is no work here harder than what you used to do in your father's house," he said. Binta was stunned. "And who told you that I am poor?" she muttered. "You aren't just poor, you're a church rat. I am only helping you. Behave yourself so my family won't complain. There are many girls out there praying to be my wife," Deo said and walked out. Binta stood frozen. Was this how Deo saw her? A church rat? Someone he was helping? Right then and there, she knew she could never marry him, but she would stay long enough to gather evidence against them. They had to pay for all the pain they caused her. One afternoon, after preparing lunch, she was inside her room when she heard her name being called from the sitting room. When she got there, Mr. Anthony was pointing at the center table. "Did you take my cufflinks?" he asked. Binta shook her head. "Look for them. You probably don't know how much they cost, which is why you moved them. Do you know that their price could feed your entire family?" Mr. Anthony sneered. Binta felt insulted. She could take any humiliation directed at her, but not at her late parents. "Sir, I didn't see your cufflinks. And please, don't involve my family. Before she could finish her sentence, a thunderous slap landed on her cheek. Who are you to talk back at me? Who the hell is your wretched family that I can't talk about them? Mr. Anthony roared. The commotion drew the entire family into the sitting room. Deo stood at the doorway, watching his father hurl insults at Binta. If not for my son, tell me where I would have come in contact with this pig. Mr. Anthony spat. Binta massaged her stinging cheek and smiled bitterly. This was the last straw. She had endured enough. And soon, they would all regret ever mistreating her. Deo shook his head and said, I saw it. That's the problem with poor people, they are always ungrateful. They don't even recognize when someone is helping them. That's why it's best to marry someone in your class. Someone who understands how hard it is to make money. Should I invite Lucy over to the house? You need someone by your side right now. You'll love her, she's more beautiful than this person you call Binta or Gold. Deo nodded in agreement, and Mrs. Anthony smiled. This was the perfect opportunity. She had been waiting for to paint Binta in a bad light and bring Lucy into the picture. Meanwhile, Binta went to the gatehouse, where the gatekeeper handed her something to soothe her swollen red eyes. Madam, what happened? Who did this to you? Clem, the gatekeeper asked with concern. Binta sighed. Clem, I've told you to stop calling me madam. I'm not a madam. She tried to smile, adding a little humor to the situation. I just had a little problem with Deo. A little problem? And he did this to you? Clem asked, his voice rising with anger. If anyone ever does something like this to my sister, I swear, I will make sure they pay for it. Binta chuckled despite her pain. But Clem, what if your sister is married? What if her husband does this to her? Clem immediately stood up, took a bit of sand from the ground, touched it to his tongue, and raised his finger toward the sky. To God who made me, I swear on my mother's grave, if any man does this to my sister, he will pay heavily. No man has the right to hit a woman, whether she is his wife or his maid. Binta smiled. Clem was exactly the kind of man every woman wished for, someone who valued women. Even as a gatekeeper, he had a strong sense of justice. Now that Deo was out of the picture, maybe settling down with Clem wouldn't be such a bad idea. Well, Clem, I think sometimes a man needs to beat his wife to reset her brain, Binta said with a straight face. Madam, spit it out. Clean your mouth, Clem exclaimed, wiping his lips in disbelief. Is your brain a machine that needs resetting? No man has the right to lay hands on you. You are my madam, but you're the same age as my younger sister. So I will tell you the same thing I told her. You are not a drum. So your husband has no right to beat you. If he wants to hit something, let him find a drum. Binta couldn't help but burst into laughter. Clem, please. My eyes hurt, I don't want to laugh. As they talked, a car horn sounded outside. Clem quickly opened the gate and smiled at the driver. When he returned, Binta asked who it was. It's Deo's friend, a girl I thought he would marry before you, Clem answered. Binta brushed the topic aside and continued their conversation. So, Clem, you really hate men who beat their wives? Yes, I despise them. Before my father died, he advised me never to hit my wife because he never hit my mother. And it's true, I never saw him raise a hand against her. You mention your mother's grave, and now you say your father is also gone? Binta asked. Yes, my mother died 2 years ago, but my father passed away a long time ago. Oh, I'm so sorry about that. What about your siblings? There are 4 of us. Our last born is staying with my uncle, and the other 2 are in the village. That's why I don't have any savings. Boys or girls? A boy and a girl. And you're the one taking care of them? Yes. Do I have a choice? Being the first son is tough, especially without money. Don't worry. Soon you'll have money, Binta said. Amen, madam, Clem replied. As they talked, Clem's mind drifted to the girl who had arrived. He wasn't sure, but something told him her visit was unusual. It had been a long time since she last came, and the last time she did, Deo had thrown her out of the house. Clem turned to Binta. Madam, please go inside, it's getting late. Oga Deo might be looking for you. I don't want to go inside, Binta protested. Madam, you have to. You can't sleep here, Clem insisted. Go inside and beg them. Beg them for what? I didn't do anything wrong. I know. But just beg them. Do whatever Oga Deo asks you to do, it won't cost you anything. We are poor, so we have no choice. I am not poor, so I have options, Binta replied firmly. Clem didn't argue further. Just go and beg them. Binta swallowed hard. She knew Clem was right, she couldn't sleep in the gatehouse. But she also wasn't going to stay in that house any longer. She had already gathered enough evidence against them, and exposing their illegal factory was the next step. As she approached the sitting room, she heard voices and laughter. She stopped and listened. Deo's voice was the loudest. When she walked in, she saw Deo on the couch, his arms wrapped around another girl. His parents were there, laughing with them. Binta's eyes swept across the room. Deo, why? She asked, her voice trembling. Mrs. Anthony let out a mocking laugh. You thought my son would marry a church rat like you? A nobody? You deserve everything you got. Deo smirked. Binta, I can't be with a woman as stubborn as you. I gave you an opportunity to escape poverty, but you rejected it. This is Lucy, the woman I'm going to marry. Yes, you don't give real food to pigs. They will never appreciate it, Mrs. Anthony added. Binta muttered under her breath. We'll see who the real rich person is. She turned to leave. Binta, Deo called. She turned. You can stay here as a maid if you want. We'll treat you well, it's better than going back to that slum. They all laughed. His parents looked delighted. His siblings, however, remained neutral, only watching. Binta nodded and walked away. A few minutes later, she returned with her luggage. The room fell silent, perhaps they expected her to accept the maid offer. Where are you going? Deo asked. To the slum, Binta replied without hesitation. Good. That's where you belong, Mrs. Anthony scoffed. But Binta didn't return to a poor house, she went back to her real home, where she had everything. Weeks later, she decided it was time to act. She reported Deo and his family to the authorities, exposing their factory where they produce fake wine. The case gained national attention. People wanted them to serve as an example to others producing harmful fake goods. One early morning, while the family was at the dining table, the loud sound of banging at the door startled them. The maid opened it, revealing high-ranking security officers. Behind them stood a beautiful woman, Binta. Mrs. Anthony's face twisted in rage. What are you doing here, you rat? To make sure you all pay for what you've been producing in the name of wine, Binta replied. Mrs. Anthony lunged forward to slap her, but one of the officers grabbed her hand. Don't try it again, he warned. Binta chuckled, clapping her hands slowly. I am Binta Francis, the only child of Francesco Motors. Deo's face paled. You're the daughter of Francesco Motors? Binta ignored him. Meanwhile, Mr. Anthony tried to bribe the officers. Name your price, he offered desperately. One officer shook his head. This case is being handled from Abuja. I'm sorry, Mr. Anthony, but this is beyond my control. Officers, come. Let me show you the factory, Binta said. Deo stood frozen, realizing that the woman he once had was now the one destroying his family. His parents had turned him against her, and now they were losing everything. Mr. Anthony and Deo were arrested. Their wealth and power crumbled. Meanwhile, Binta later married Clem, the gatekeeper, and they
क्या खाने तो नवीद को मतलब फोन करना कुछ नवीद को नंबर है ना को फोन कर चलो
काल नहीं चाहना भी हम नवीद का नंबर
वो क्या खाने थे मैं पूछिए बनी उठी बनी
अरे वीडियो बना दे
वीडियो बनती पे अरे केड़ी 3 मिनट 3.5 मिनट बन गई वो
7 मिनट में बनाओ
इतनी ड्रैग न बना बड़ी
सांग यार
मतलब 7 मिनट तो मैं तक और फिर तक आके 7 मिनट
उससे
यहाँ से बैठ गए नवीद
दरबार क्या है यार आराम ना जो तीन में खड़खड़ा देंदा जो बो
क्या की थी नवीद
ये तो नहीं खुले हां ये नहीं खुले ये ना तीन है शक्तिमान है ताकत है सही नहीं यार वो तो नहीं देंदे
क्या दे
वो फोन ही नहीं तेरा कुछ ते तोड़ी तीन सिक्का ते बात सुन कराए नहीं तोड़ी से नहीं असम भी मैंने को यात्रा दे उठा जो
किधर
मैं देते
कौन बोल रहा है
तो संगी
जी जी
ਇਹ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਇਹ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਮੈਂ ਜੀ ਸ਼ੀਟ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਰਾਈਟ ਕਰਾਉਣੇ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਸਕ੍ਰਿਪਟ
तो मैं कितना में नवीद
ਉਹ ਤਾਂ ਮੈਂ ਸ਼ਾਰਟ ਕਰਨੇ
तो कटा जुला
पर बड़ी पैसे नहीं नहीं
हैं
सब कितनी आने है सारा
समझ नहीं आई
मैं कि सारा नहीं कितनी आने है
अच्छा
तो इतने ही बनवा ही पाए हो
अच्छा क्या नाम
ਐਸਾ ਸੰਗੀ ਉਹ ਤਾਂ 11 ਮਿੰਟ ਦੇ 14 ਮਿੰਟ ਦੀ ਵੀਡੀਓ ਜਦ ਤੱਕ 5 ਮਿੰਟ ਦੀ ਬਣੀ ਪਈ 6 ਮਿੰਟ ਦੀ
ये तो नहीं पसंद
ਇਹ ਠੀਕ ਹੈ ਇਹ ਦੇਖੋ
ये तो पता है जो उसके दिया ना सर की
फिर
या यहाँ दे सब्रेट
मैं
हां
बराबर आ दिया था
पहली मैं ही कराई और ठीक है ये ਜਿਹੜੀ ਪ੍ਰਾਈਮ ਹੈ ਨਾ
क्या किया सकरी बड़ी लिख दी थी
ਸ਼ਾਰਟ ਪਾਸ ਸਾਡੀ ਸੀ ਵਧੀਆ ਵੀਡੀਓ 14 ਮਿੰਟ ਦੀ ਇਹ ਕੋਈ 5 ਮਿੰਟ ਦੀ ਤਾਂ ਸੈਟ ਕਰਾਂਗੇ
सारी तो बोल देनी थी तू कदे गलत रहे करे sorry